My boyfriend claims that all men struggle to go past their testicles when getting into cold water. I feel like he is being a little overdramatic. We are turning to Reddit to settle this. Story 1. The trick is to just go for it. Jump in, fully immerse yourself quickly. The discomfort passes fast. Slowly walking in deeper and deeper, easing into it only prolongs the discomfort as each new part of your body gets exposed. Story 2. Unless you think your husband has the right to educate you on what having a menstrual period feels like, you better take his word on this one. Story 3. If it is cold, I am better off jumping in. If I go downstairs, use a ladder, or any other gradual entry, it is hard. It takes your breath away when your testicles hit the cold water. Story 4. Canadian here. I do the polar bear swim every New Year. If you tiptoe daintily into the water, then yes. But the only way to do it is running full tilt in. Story 5. I let it get to my waist, then pretend to stretch and fix my goggles. Then I dive in and start swimming while yelling and laughing maniacally to myself underwater. It works for me in low 60-degree water temperatures. Story 6. It is wildly uncomfortable until you are just in. Then you are fine. They are an organ that is only protected by the thinnest skin imaginable. They are tendinous. Story 7. He is absolutely right. It is one of those situations where you have to just proceed. Otherwise, it will take you all day. Story 8. It is uncomfortable. Probably not as uncomfortable as arguing about testicles with someone who does not have any, though. Story 9. He is not lying about it. The toughest part of getting into cold water is the initial entry. But once you are in, it is like nothing. Story 10. I am very tolerant of cold weather and even prefer it. But for some reason cold water is incredibly uncomfortable for me. It is like literal torture sometimes. I have the ability to adapt to it, but the initial moments are very painful. If it is something like a cold shower, it is game over. I cannot adapt due to the combination of moving air and water. However, I can adapt to a cold river. Story 11. The whole reason testicles hang outside of the body is to regulate their temperature to the optimal level for sperm production. They are very sensitive to temperature changes, which is why they hang outside and retract or extend depending on the temperature. For men, getting into water is essentially a choice between going in up to the thighs, up to the neck, or full submersion. If you go past the testicles, there is no reason to stop until you reach the point of getting your hair wet, as it can be uncomfortable at first. Story 12. I agree with your boyfriend on this. Why do you have to turn to Reddit and not just believe your boyfriend? Even considering that he might be overdramatic? Do you do that often? Story 13. He is not being dramatic. It is a real experience, similar to reaching a depth in the pool where your nipples become wet. It is a very instinctive sensation. Story 14. If you go in slowly, the worst part is when your testicles hit the water. If you just jump in, they retract inside your body and hide. Story 15. Everything is outside the body. The temperature change on the most sensitive parts is a shock, like a sudden kick. Sometimes jumping in quickly is the best approach. I did that once, and the water turned out to be about 40 degrees Fahrenheit. Not the comfortable 60 I was expecting. No one else went swimming that day. Story 16. Do women not have trouble with their genitals getting cold? I assumed that was universal. It is similar to the next step of the stomach, which I do not think is very different. Story 17. The father of a close friend of mine passed away about a year ago. To this day, he is often remembered for a loud conversation he had with his son-in-law about walking into Lake Superior at the moment when one's genitals make contact with the water. Story 18. I am very sensitive to temperatures. I can dive or jump into cold water and do fine, but it still hurts. It is not just cold. It is painful. If the water temperature is above 100 to 110 degrees Fahrenheit, it burns. I am the same way with food and drink. I cannot eat food that is hot. If it is too cold, it hurts. It is something I have to deal with. I keep the thermostat set to about 78 degrees year-round. Story 19. It is a highly unpleasant feeling, beyond the general sensation of entering cold water. However, as a man, he should just get in and stop being dramatic about it. The water is cold. No one cares. Move on. Story 20. I don't feel particularly bad about my testicles, but that may be because I absolutely hate cold water to begin with. Story 21. Yes, I go to the pool quite often. I have to slowly acclimate my entire body, including my testicles, when there is a substantial temperature difference between the air and the pool water. Story 22. I can generally get into all kinds of cold water without too much trouble, but the nuts are always the toughest part. Story 23. I struggle, but it is not because of my testicles. I just do not like cold water. Anyway, if anything, this breaks down a long race. It seems like the white people I know are much better at getting into cold water than the Hispanic or black people. I am half joking, but it is true. Story 24. It really is a struggle. The testicles are very sensitive. The trick is to go fast. Trying to go slowly and gently is torture. Just jump in and get it done like removing a bandage. Story 25. It's definitely unpleasant. I'm not sure how to explain it to someone who does not have testicles. Imagine dangling your ovaries in cold water, perhaps. However, it is temporary, and the best approach is to just dive in. Story 26. It hurts. I have to get pretty psyched up to get into cold water. I understand what your boyfriend is saying. Story 27. There is definitely a big pause when the water gets there if you are going in slowly. That is usually the point where you either dive in or get out. No one wants to watch you tiptoe and squealing. Story 28. Okay, your genitals are not hanging outside your body, so it may be difficult to understand. The testicles are very sensitive to temperature. The skin of the scrotum loosens when you are hot, allowing the testicles to descend lower to increase distance from the body and cool down. When it is cold, they move closer to the body to stay warm. Story 29. I cannot stand being cold in general, but I think that is just because I am extremely thin and possibly iron deficient, not specifically because I am a man. Story 30. I will walk into freezing water, up to my thigh, but not knee deep. I have to psych myself up for that plunge, and a second time for going head in fully too. Once you go knee deep, that's when my heart rate spikes and I hyperventilate a bit. Story 31. It is definitely not easy. Given the choice, I would jump in all at once rather than just wait. Some parts are very sensitive to the cold. Story 32. No, a couple of weeks getting overwhelmed by the military and taking ice baths was my least favorite part. Story 33. No, he is completely in the right. The only solution is to wait and adjust slowly, or jump in and regret it later. Story 34. It hurts, but it is easier to go all the way in at once and endure a few seconds of pain, rather than trying to ease into it slowly. If you dive right in, your whole body will be in pain instead of focusing only on the discomfort in your testicles. Doing it quickly distracts you from the pain because everything else also hurts. After a few seconds, it gets easier. Story 35. I am a woman and I do not swim in this state, even in late summer. I hate being in cold water with a passion, but I love swimming in general. Warm water only for me. Story 36. I am not a man, but my husband is. He does not struggle, but I do. I cramp up until I vomit if it is really bad. I swear he likes it, and I do not know if it is just because we are in Australia and it is not really cold or not. Story 37. I swim regularly in Lake Tahoe, one of the closest lakes. The trick is to dunk yourself as quickly as possible. Once you are completely underwater, your body will acclimate quickly, and you will no longer be worried about discomfort. Story 38. I do a cold plunge every day. I take a few deep breaths before, then another deep exhale before I go fully under. The quicker you get fully underwater, the easier it is. Like most things in life, you just have to go for it. Story 39. I used to swim in a lake fed by snowmelt runoff from the Rocky Mountains. It was never my testicles that made me stop when getting in the lake. It was around the bottom of my ribs, where the cold made my diaphragm seize up for a second. I had to let it adjust a bit and catch my breath. Story 40. He really is not. The moment the water touches your testicles, you do not just feel the shock of the cold from the sensitive nerves there. You feel them start to retract into your body at an alarming rate that can sometimes be painful. Story 41. It is a genuine struggle for me. It can take me several minutes to become fully immersed in the ocean from the moment I first step a toe in if the water is cold. Story 42. Just walking or stepping into cold water takes a long time. Diving or jumping in is the fastest way with minimal discomfort to the feet. Story 43. I do not remember this being a problem, but it has been a while. I do remember jumping into a river that was about 55 degrees. The air temperature was about 85 degrees. There were many naked women and men around, and I was glad that I did not get an erection. It did not hurt. Story 44. For me, it is my upper body that is the struggle. Yes, the family jewels take a bit of a shock, but not compared to my stomach. Story 45. It is a struggle, but he could also be dramatic. It depends on how difficult he said it is. It is pretty uncomfortable, but it is not absolutely unbearable. Story 46. My geologist friend called that the gonadocline, the boundary at which moving into cold water causes a transition from heat loss at the extremities to heat retention in the core. Women may not feel it as intensely as men, but human bodies seek to retain core heat. The male body must transition the testicles from external to internal to maintain core temperature. So yes, it is a real phenomenon. To deny it is like asking why nipples become erect in cold air. It is simply an evolutionary adaptation advantageous for reproduction. Story 47. That is true, but going slow does not make it any better. You have to rip off that band-aid. If possible, I always jump into the water. Story 48. It depends on the occasion. If the situation permits, I just send it. Jump in and the challenges will adjust or disappear. Story 49. Getting used to cold water or cold water adaptation. Takes time and repeated exposure to help your body adjust to plunging into colder water temperatures. I used to hate jumping into pools in the ocean, but since I started swimming regularly, I have become much better at walking into the water without making a big fuss. I assume your boyfriend does not swim very much, and you do not have access to a lot of cold or moderately cold water swimming near you. Story 50. I don't struggle to enter cold water, but that's probably because I prefer being cold. I work in a refrigerated warehouse and do cold plunges during the colder parts of the year. Also, I'm joking. Story 51. Cold water is really not that bad. You definitely notice it, but I would argue it is not too different when it reaches other parts of the body. Some people are sensitive when it comes to cold water, and I guess that some men use their genitals as an excuse. Story 52. It is very unpleasant. The testicles are homologous structures to the ovaries. Imagine dunking your ovaries into cold water, but instead of having all the subcutaneous fat and connective tissue insulating them, you have only a thin layer of skin. Story 53. Every part is bad when you ease in. I think the torso is worse than the lower parts. I submerged myself in Lake Tahoe for the first time yesterday. I waded out to mid-thigh, counted down from 3, and dropped myself in. It was the most painless way to do it, and I felt it more in my shoulders and chest than anywhere else. Story 54. I do get into the water quite frequently. However, it would be much nicer if the groin area did not get wet or cold. Story 55. I am very particular about water. Honestly, if I dive in, which is rare, it is the only time anything above my knees gets wet. When I get in, I love it, but most of the time I just can't. I am the quarterback and pitcher, tossing balls to the boys all day though. Story 56. No issue with nuts in cold water. My belly is the issue for me. I don't usually go slow, as it is harder to adjust. In a pool, sea, lake, or whatever, I usually just enter up to my waist, then lower myself up to my neck to adjust. After this, I am fine. In the shower, I first run cold water on my legs and hands to adjust, then on my chest, back, and all in. Story 57. There are 2 steps that I dislike doing. The first one is because I do not like cold water, and the second is when I have to dip my testicles. Story 58. The courage is not the main problem. I usually start to consider backing out when the water reaches my stomach. Story 59. It depends on how cold I already am, but it takes a lot to rattle me. When I was first getting certified to dive in New England, I did my 5 open water dives in 2 days in water that was 48 to 50 degrees at depth, and it was genuinely brutal. I am a woman, but my instructor was a man. We all played it cool and died inside. Story 60. I usually just do a cannonball into cold water if possible because that cold water hitting your body then going up your back is the hardest part. Once past that, I can get neck deep easily. Story 61. He is correct that it is an obstacle as the testicles are sensitive to temperatures. However, testicles are generally attached to men, which means he needs to stop complaining. Jumping in quickly is the best solution as it means the discomfort is over quickly. Story 62. It is something you have to train yourself to get used to. Once it is normal for you, it becomes easy, but it takes time to train. Story 63. Our scrotum is very sensitive to temperature as it works to regulate the temperature of our testicles for optimal sperm production. When we are warm, the scrotum relaxes and expands, creating more surface area to shed excessive heat and keep the testicles as close as possible to the optimum temperature to protect sperm cells. When we are cold, it shrinks and tightens to preserve heat and protect the sperm cells. Therefore, it is more sensitive to temperature changes compared to the rest of the body. Story 64. My wife tried to get me to jump into a cold lake. I got in up to my knees and almost threw up because my body could not handle it. I am very serious. Story 65. Struggle seems a bit overdramatic, but it is not pleasant to have cold water hit sensitive areas. It sends an unpleasant shock up the spine. It is best to just jump in. Story 66. Yes, we do. Women have no idea what it is like to walk around with a sack of life between their legs. It is extremely sensitive to sudden temperature changes. Story 67. I literally have to stop and contemplate if I even want to continue swimming before the first below-the-waist dip. It is easier to just cannonball in to bypass the fear. Story 68. Honestly, the nuts are not the issue. It is going from thighs to torso for me. The cold has never bothered my testicles. Cold water can be more painful to my feet than any other body part. Story 69. Jesus. The only time I touch the water is if I went to great lengths on a trip to get there and I don't want to regret not going in. I go to Greece quite a bit. The water there is surprisingly cold, but when you fly, hop on a ferry, and go to a secluded beach that's gorgeous, you have to go in the water. But if I lived there, I wouldn't touch it. Story 70. That is definitely the hardest part for me, getting into water of any temperature that is not skin temperature. Story 71. I don't think he is being overdramatic. It is quite cold. When your testicles hang outside your body, shocking them with extremely cold water, like in a swimming pool, can take your breath away. They have to pull up to stay nice and warm inside instead. Story 72. My testicles react the same way as the rest of my body. There is nothing special about the testicles and cold water. I think he is just telling you to put your hands on them to keep them warm for different reasons. Story 73. I have fished in cold water before and wading into it is okay, but I still have to brace myself for going in completely. It is quite shocking for the first few minutes, but you can get over it. Those individuals draw close to the body when in cold water, and it is not a pleasant feeling. Story 74. Getting in cold water is truly one of the hardest things in life for me. It is hard to overstate how uncomfortable it is. It is not the chest, though. It is when I get to the lower back that it really starts to become a challenge. Story 75. I just despise getting in cold water. Not really an issue with it on genitals. I just hate cold water. Story 76. Wading into cold water is not a problem for your legs, torso, or face. However, the testicles are more sensitive, and it is uncomfortable to put them in cold water. I live in British Columbia, where most of our lakes are very cold. It is much better to jump in than to walk in slowly, so the shock is distributed evenly over your body. Story 77. That's why you have to jump in the deep end. When your whole body is going through it at once, you do not even think about your nerves. Story 78. Jump into the deep end like a real man, all or nothing. Wading into cold water is the devil's way of tickling your taint. Story 79. Walking into a cold lake is tough, but I have never really thought of it as a crazy thing. It is just my skin overall that feels the cold. There seem to be many people who find it harder than I do. Story 80. The slower you go, the worse you're making it for yourself. Once you get to the ankles, just wade in at a steady pace. It is much less unpleasant than going very slowly. The testicles do not actually go into the body. They just retract very close to it. It is not a pleasant feeling, but it is easy to get over. I feel like some people are dramatic and some are not. Any explanation they give is just a story they tell themselves, regardless of gender. Your boyfriend is probably just more sensitive to the cold and is unintentionally making it worse for himself. Story 81. It's your initial toes or legs since it is the first contact. Once you get past that, the nuts getting cold is not a big deal. Story 82. Depends on the Celsius. I'm often a really hot shower type of guy. I like my water just a degree below boiling. So even around 37 degrees Celsius is seen as bland and mildly uncomfortable for me. The moment it evaporates, it becomes too cool to enjoy. However, I have recently trained myself to tolerate colder and colder water temperatures because my heat receptors probably died out by now. On a serious note, 20 degrees Celsius water is really pushing it for me. Story 83. I find it hard, but I do it. It is not comfortable on the testicles, but that is not the hardest part. The abdomen is the hardest part. He is being dramatic. Story 84. The upper inside thigh is one of the spots that trigger bodily instincts. This is due to the presence of the femoral artery there. Cooling where arteries are near the surface results in faster overall heat loss. Smaller vessels can constrict to reduce heat loss, but arteries cannot. The testicles are very sensitive. The combination of this sensitivity with the presence of arteries is likely why most men react strongly at that moment. Additionally, the purpose of the testicles hanging in the scrotum is to regulate their temperature, as sperm are highly sensitive to temperatures outside a narrow range. In addition to basic sensitivity, there is likely a reflex reaction when exposing them to cold water, as this can temporarily reduce fertility for a few days if the temperature gets too low. Evolution has ensured that men protect their testicles because the opportunity to reproduce is unpredictable. When I used to go caving frequently, the term first critical referred to the groin when wading through 55-degree Fahrenheit cave water. The nipples are the second most critical area, likely due to arteries in the inside upper arms. The neck is third most critical, again because of arteries near the surface. Story 85. Personally, I am already too hot all the time, so it is not an issue. I warm the water by being in it. Story 86. I kayak in snowmelt rivers frequently. When my wetsuit is filling, my focus is entirely on when the water reaches my groin. That is the true test. To answer your question, there is no body part one share with women that comes close to experiencing that initial icy sensation. Story 87. He is not wrong, but commenters saying you have to go all in at once are also right. Just cannonball and get it over with. Story 88. I am probably an outlier, but I absolutely hate being wet if it is not warm water. A nice hot shower is fine, but I am not getting in a pool. My entire body would spasm, and I would be stuck on the couch for days. Story 89. I have no idea what the rest of the people here are talking about. I have never noticed any coldness in my genitals, only in my sides and legs. Story 90. I have seen several comments that are accurate about this, so I will just add that yes, my testicles are very sensitive. When I get right up to the water line, there is a hesitation and then a quick plunge. Story 91. The boys need to stay at the correct temperature. They are literally fighting for their lives when they enter cold water. Story 92. When getting used to the cold water at the beach while preparing to go surfing, the feet always take the longest. It is painful. Story 93. Never had an issue with cold water. Hot or even mildly tepid water, on the other hand, forget about it. It takes me about half an hour and multiple attempts to get into a bath. Story 94. I struggle a lot more than my boyfriend getting into cold water. He jumps right in. But he grew up in the Pacific Northwest and I did not. Story 95. Go ankle deep. Then to knees. Upper thighs. Deep breath, then waist. Say forget it and go under completely. Story 96. I mean, it definitely sends a chill down your spine if you slowly move into the cold water. Like when I went into a glacier river in Norway, I felt like my testicles were falling off. It was so cold walking in. But when I jumped into an ice bath in a swimming pool, I did not have that experience since I jumped in all at once. Just as with women and their anatomy, men have varying levels of sensitivity. Story 97. Weirdly, I have no issue with the nuts and cold water. It is my back that gets me, though only with the wall of the tub, not the water. I run cold compared to other people and adapt well to the cold. I am not as good with heat, however. Story 98. It depends on why I am going in. Polar bear club, giving lessons, or chaining trees to rip them out, and I just jump right in. Anything recreational or non-essential, and I am just not going in. Story 99. You do not have testicles, so how do you know he is being overdramatic? You do not have any idea how sensitive testicles are. Would you feel the same way if he told you that you were being dramatic when you had period cramps? I doubt it. Personally, I do not presume to know what period cramps feel like because I do not have a uterus. Story 100. All people experience things differently. That being said, I find the cold water to be a bigger shock when it hits my core around my belly button than when it hits my groin. I also think many men tend to overreact when something happens near their genital area. It is sensitive, and if injured, it can swell and be quite painful, but the effect is often no worse than a similar injury elsewhere, such as on a leg. We are socialized to react that way and to laugh at others when something happens to them, but it hurts everyone. There are many women who experience similar pain. Story 101. Yes, I can confirm. I stop just below my testicles every time. Often, I do not go further to avoid it. That being said, if I get past my testicles, I quickly reach the waistband of my shorts, which I also do not want to go past. Story 102. If you just send it and go fast, it is unpleasant but tolerable for a moment. If you go slow, it hurts intensely. It is the worst part of swimming. I think most females forget the testicles are organs that are exposed to air for temperature regulation. It is like if your kidney were exposed to air for cooling purposes. Story 103. The slower you go, the more you think about how it will feel and the worse it gets. I just jump in and get it over with. Story 104. As long as my wife does not drop her purse, we are all good. I do not have a wife, but you get the point. Story 105. You experience a significant increase in cold and pain when the testicles enter the water. Going up to the knees is much easier than going up to the waist. If the water is very cold, it can feel like a shock when it contacts the testicles. Story 106. I suppose it depends on how cold, but I have never encountered a pool, lake, river, or ocean that was too cold for me to just jump into. Although I have never swum outdoors in the winter, I have never felt that my testicles were notably more temperature sensitive than anywhere else. I have never felt the need to ease myself into the water. Full body immersion right from the start feels amazingly refreshing, and you get used to it in under a minute. Story 107. That is unwise. The cold shock occurs because the torso becomes cold. Your limbs can tolerate cold much better. It just happens that the testicles are located in between, but they are not the cause of the cold shock. Story 108. I'm with the original poster. Anyone making a big deal about this is overreacting. The testicles will shrink to conserve heat on their own. You will not even notice it. What prevents men from getting into cold water is thermal shock. Any large surface area of skin, such as thighs or torso, will be difficult to submerge. Story 109. He is being dramatic. It is no colder than it is for anyone else. Cold water on your testicles is no worse than on your legs when you get in. Story 110. He is timid. Sure. The testicles are sensitive, but please stop being overly cautious and just jump in and enjoy the water. Story 111. Not a man, but my boyfriend at the time was able to go shoulder deep in 3 degrees Celsius, 37.4 degrees Fahrenheit. Water for a cold plunge. I did too, but got out before him because it started to feel quite painful. Story 112. He is being dramatic because he is a coward. If you just do it, the discomfort lasts 15 to 20 seconds before they retract, and blood keeps them warm. If you held his testicles in a bag of ice while performing oral stimulation, he would think he was in heaven. It is about will, not the method. Story 113. Not at all. Your boyfriend is mistaken because everyone has been in a cold tub these days. They would be sitting in 34-degree Fahrenheit, just above freezing, ice water after some brutal practices and training sessions daily. Sometimes you just understand what your job is and you get it done. Your boyfriend should maybe become a little more worldly before giving out any more all-men proclamations. Anyone involved in organized sports doesn't get to escape this anymore. The higher you go, the more regular it is during the season and off-season. Story 114. I love getting in cold water, but I always do it quickly. I really like cold plunges. The colder, the better. Your husband is a wimp. Story 115. Most guys are overly dramatic. They claim that their testicles climb into their stomach in freezing water. One man tried to prove this by having me feel his stomach, and I said, "How about I feel your testicles instead?" You know what? He was right, no testicles. Story 116. My husband and I swam in 55-degree water to reach a beautiful waterfall. How cold is that? Is it like normal swimming pool water? If so, then yes, he is being dramatic. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.